It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. My name is Geoff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. This week, I am talking about The Beast Must Die, which is made by the Amicus people. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Amicus here in a minute, but while The Beast Must Die is a werewolf movie, it is not your typical werewolf movie, and I'll have a lot to say about that here in just a moment. But first, let's talk about Amicus Productions. Now, they came along in the early 60s, and they ended up producing a lot of movies with Hammer horror regulars, particularly Peter Cushing, as in with this movie, and Christopher Lee. What's kind of interesting is that their movies are often, particularly their horror movies, because of the presence of a lot of Hammer actors, in particular Cushing and Lee, they often get confused with Hammer horror productions. However, there's a big difference between the two of them. First off, Hammer horror, with very, very few exceptions, almost always existed as a period piece, particularly with something more along the lines of like the gothic horror type of stuff, your Draculas, your Frankensteins, movies like that. Whereas Amicus tended to produce contemporary horror, which is the case with this. This is, mid-70s. This is absolutely meant to exist in the now at the time that it was released. The other thing that Amicus did that was kind of interesting is what they called portmanteau horror films. And really all that means is that they did horror movies that were anthologies. They did movies like The House That Dripped Blood, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Terror. They were big on producing horror movies that gave people a little bit of everything, and very, very much, you could say, inspired by the horror comic books of the 50s, in particular Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Terror, or Vault of Horror, rather. These are, it's really evident that they were really trying to kind of give people more bang for their buck. Why produce an hour-and-a-half movie for one of these stories when you could give people just the right amount of horror, right amount of kind of Twilight Zone-y type of storytelling in 20 minutes, and then produce 3 or 4 more of those types of movie or stories within one single movie. The other thing that Amicus did that is also parallel in a lot of ways to Hammer was that Amicus was did not shy away from doing other types of movies, in particular science fiction movies. 2 movies that they did not long after they came into being in the early 60s were Doctor Who and the Daleks, which was an adaptation of a Doctor Who serial that was the second ever serial that was ever produced for Doctor Who. And that came out in 1965, and it starred Peter Cushing as the Doctor, and definitely followed more along the lines of that grandfatherly type of Doctor that the first Doctor was. Then the following year, they did Daleks' Invasion of Earth 2150 AD, which was also an adaptation of a second season Doctor Who Dalek story, the Dalek Invasion of Earth. Now, this was during a time in which what was called Dalek Mania was kind of sweeping the world. It wasn't just the UK. The Daleks were almost have always been until the more recent Doctor Who series. They were always the most easily exportable thing from the original classic Doctor Who era. Their creator, Terry Nation, had a very special agreement with the BBC. He was able to really, I think even to this day, the Nation family still owns the rights to the Daleks. And Terry Nation tried to cash in on that as much as possible. They were thrilling villains. They were very compelling bad guys, being these kind of robotic creatures that only cared to kill and to destroy. And so, yeah, that was something that Amicus was able to really kind of use and kind of cash in on a little bit. Now, The Beast Must Die was their final horror film. Amicus ended in 1977. However, one of the founders, Milton Subotsky, continued into the 80s and even did some Stephen King adaptations, one of which was another anthology that was based on Stephen King short stories. And that's what The Beast Must Die is also based on, which is a short story that was published in the 50s that then was adapted into this movie. And this movie was directed by Paul Annette, and he was mostly a TV director, having done a lot of British television. Between this and one other film in 1980 called Never Neverland, those were his only two featured films. He almost worked exclusively on television, which is kind of interesting because I do think this movie kind of shows a lot of that, the TV sensibilities, which I'll get to here in a little bit. What makes this movie really, really interesting is that this movie is designed from the onset to be a whodunit. The very opening of this movie, especially if you see the original version of this movie, there was a version of the movie that was renamed and released later that removes some of the mystery element of this. But at the beginning of this movie, you're told that this movie is a detective story in which we are the detectives and we are to discover which of the characters is a werewolf. They even talk about there being a 30-second break before the final act of the movie that is called the werewolf break. And at that point in time, all of the evidence and all of the clues have been provided, and you're supposed to, as an audience member, make your selection as to who you think the werewolf is among this group, which is very interesting because it's a monster movie that decides to use kind of the classic Agatha Christie kind of sensibilities to it, and that's one of the things that is very present in this movie, and it's something that is definitely used in all of the marketing for the movie as well. But this movie has a pretty amazing cast. As I mentioned, you got Peter Cushing in here, but you also have Calvin Lockhart, who was kind of a character actor. He was Bahamian, and he actually was best known for the blaxploitation film Cotton Comes to Harlem, where he played a preacher in that. But he also was in a movie called Let's Do It Again, where he played a character named Biggie Smalls. Now, for those of you who are aficionados of rap music, you'll know that Biggie Smalls was kind of the nickname and the media name for the Notorious B.I.G. And when Notorious B.I.G. Did his first demo and sent it in, he did go by the name Biggie Smalls, but then was sued and had to change his name to the Notorious B.I.G. But that didn't stop people from kind of in more of a like I said, it was kind of a media nickname and what friends called him. They always refer to him as Biggie Smalls. We also have Michael Gambon, who, of course, played Dumbledore in the Harry Potter films after Richard Harris passed away. We have Charles Gray, who's best known for a couple of James Bond movies and, of course, playing the criminologist in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. We also have Marlene Clark, who plays Calvin Lockhart's character's wife. She was probably best known for playing Ganja in Ganja and Hess, and was also a girlfriend character in one of the seasons of Sanford and Son. So really, this is not a cast that is lacking any experience. We also have Syrian Madden, who's also in this. She was in quite a few British movies in the 70s in particular, so, or at least television shows, I should say, in the 70s. So she might be pretty recognizable for her TV work. So what this movie is about, and I really cannot go into too much of this, just because it's a movie you really need to see how everything plays out and how it works. So I'm going to really give a very, very basic overview of what this movie is without giving away any of the mystery around this movie, because this is a movie that I think going into it, you need to not know who the werewolf is. You need to know, you just kind of need the basics. Let the movie play out for you, and then go back later and look at the clues again. But first and foremost, it kind of starts with this opening where Calvin Lockhart is apparently being hunted, and it seems as though it's kind of a most dangerous game type of situation. However, he's doing this to kind of test security and test security measures that he has in place. And what he's really kind of doing is really kind of setting the stage for how he, even though he is a very accomplished millionaire and big game hunter, he is basically showing that he likes to kind of have as much advantage that he can possibly have, especially when he's trying to track something he feels is particularly dangerous and particularly difficult. He has 5 guests that he has invited over, plus his wife, that he says, well, all of the people here are in some way, shape, or form connected by way of death. His wife's friend, and that's Davina, and Davina's wife, or husband rather, Jan, they're there, and Davina is known for a lot of parties that she's gone to. She was kind of a socialite and kind of a jet setter. Well, every time she would go to a party, a couple of people would wind up dead. And it's kind of mysterious. Was it drugs? Was it a murder? Was it a fight? What was it? But the one thing that was always common was that she was at a party where people ended up dead. Of course, Tom's wife, Caroline, is there because she's married to a big game hunter who kills. He takes thrill in killing. Then you have an artist by the name of Paul Foote. And Paul was recently released from prison for potentially being connected to a murder, but somebody that he had painted in one of his paintings, he ate part of him just to try it out, just to see what the big deal is with cannibalism. And he went to jail, but he was recently released. Then you have a disgraced diplomat by the name of Arthur Bennington. A couple of his staffers ended up dead. He got basically thrown out of being a diplomat. He's now basically a television presenter. It's kind of one of those things where he was kind of thrown out around the the embarrassment of his staffers showing up dead, but that there wasn't really anything that was going to be so public that he couldn't still continue to ultimately get that job as being a television person. And then you have Professor Lundgren, who is a biologist, and I think he's just kind of generally a science man, and that's Peter Cushing. However, he has a dirty little secret about what his real passion is, which is lycanthropy. He's an expert in the old Eastern European rules and stories of lycanthropy. And that leads Tom Newcliffe, which is Calvin Lockhart, to tell everybody, you're here because I know one of you is a werewolf, and I'm going to hunt you and kill you. But he's also going to play it as very much as a host. he's not going to kill somebody right off the top. He's going to wait for the werewolf to turn, and then he will be able to kill the right person. He doesn't know which one this is, but there's all the evidence around these people stacks up to any one of these people could be a werewolf. However, he doesn't really think Lundgren is. He's just there to kind of coach him about some of the rules of lycanthropy. That doesn't prevent him or his own wife from potentially being fingered as being one of the as being a werewolf. So there's a lot of really cool things in the first 2 acts of this movie. It is a relatively slow movie, but it stays interesting for a couple of reasons that I'm going to get to when I get to my likes. But you have a situation where Calvin Lockhart's character, Tom, is constantly trying to basically taunt a lot of people into exposing themselves to be a werewolf. There's a dinner scene where he's having Professor Lundgren talk about all this really gory stuff about being a werewolf while he's serving extremely rare meat to the people. He's teasing them about, passing around a silver candlestick because silver is supposedly dangerous, which is all a ploy because as Professor Lundgren says, he did forget one thing. Silver doesn't really poison a werewolf until they have breathed in pollen from wolfsbane. Well, we find out that Tom knows that for sure. He's just playing with them because he's got a bunch of wolfsbane in his greenhouse. So it's kind of fun stuff like that but slowly as time goes on, things become strained and things become more and more dangerous because you're also dealing with a hunter who has an obsession to hunt this most deadly prey. So it ends up kind of crescendoing to the end of the second act where some really bad stuff happens and Tom is starting to basically come unhinged, and then we get into the final act where things start to reveal themselves as far as who is a werewolf among this group. So I don't want to give any more away than that. It's just other than to say it's a very interestingly crafted movie because it is very much crafted like what you would see in the 70s as like crime drama, like a Columbo. It's a little bit more Agatha Christie in the setting that it's this country mansion. You have people all in this room and you have somebody telling each and every person what he knows about them. So it is very Agatha Christie in that element, but it's a very interesting and a lot of fun to watch. So let me get to those 3 things that I like about this movie. And again, I've got to be careful what I say here because I don't want to give too much away as far as this plot, because if this is something that sounds interesting to you, I think it would be worth for you to take a look at. First and foremost, this is an extremely efficient movie. While it is right at about 90 minutes, if you don't count the opening credits, the explanation of what you're going to see and what your job is to do during the werewolf break, quote unquote, and the end credits, it hits right at 90 minutes. But it is incredibly efficient in the sense that it entirely takes place on the grounds of this mansion and inside the mansion. So it's a movie that is made for extremely low cost, but you're able to really get some pretty good talent to work on this movie, and it's it keeps you interested, not by having a lot of gory makeup effects or a werewolf transformation scene, or it keeps you fascinated by way of the performances and just the general story and how the story unfolds. And that kind of leads into my second about this movie, and that's the nature of the whodunit. This movie, like I said, is very much portrayed like an Agatha Christie or an episode of Mystery or something on public television, where you are presented with no firsthand evidence. You're almost acting like you're the jury or a judge in a trial. all of this stuff is being brought to you, and you're not necessarily, like I said, you're seeing red herrings, but you're not necessarily seeing a werewolf transformation. You're seeing situations that you have to think back to your notes if you're taking mental notes, or if you're actually physically writing down notes. Who was present and who wasn't present when something happened? So there's a lot of stuff like that, and that very nature of how a whodunit is constructed really plays well to a movie that's very efficient and stays really just inside this house and has to keep your attention and it has to keep you engrossed in this mystery without it being, without you just saying, oh God, I wish they'd just leave this house, or I wish they'd have another setting, or I wish I could see these characters doing something without being guided along. Which that sort of leads me to my third like about this movie, and that is the performances, particularly from Calvin Lockhart. Calvin Lockhart is really kind of the only person who is in basically every single scene of this movie. You do not see any of the characters without Calvin Lockhart there, or a part of that scene, or a part of that situation. We do not get any kind of evidence for our own. Calvin Lockhart has to be the one who brings us the evidence. And one of the things that he has to do also is portray a kind of a desperate hunter. Not that the hunter himself begins desperate. He's very sure of himself. But as the movie goes on and as things happen in this movie, that very confident hunter starts to kind of fray a bit, and he becomes obsessed. And he is so focused on kind of bagging this perfect kill that people who know him don't recognize him anymore. The person that he's married to is kind of had enough of him at this point, because now he's also kind of lumping her in with these other suspects. And it really kind of creates this really kind of over-the-top performance from Calvin Lockhart that is absolutely commanding at the same time. And when I say that it's an over-the-top performance, I don't want that to be misconstrued as something that is corny or it's hammy or anything like that. I mean, it's you are seeing this person starting to unravel a little bit, and that's what makes this movie extremely watchable, as well as having this kind of very interesting kind of monster movie that also plays out as a crime drama almost, or as a mystery movie. So that's one of those things about this movie. I definitely recommend that if you have any interest at all in seeing something that is made very much on the cheap, but is powered by a really strong set of performances and a pretty good little mystery that you're being told to solve it yourself, and you're being kind of told to say, okay, you're now having to make the decision of who you think this werewolf is in the room, and it really makes for an interesting it really makes for an interesting 90 minutes, a very different type of monster movie. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday, and you get a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. And you can also find both the Film Seizure podcast as well as the Monster Mondays. You will be able to find those in places where other podcasts are found, like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify. We're even on Amazon through their Audible service. You do not have to have a Prime account, or you do not have to have an Audible account or anything like that. You can just listen to it for free there. Additionally, go on over to Facebook and Twitter. Follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. We're also on Instagram too, so you can get notified when new things are being released by us fine folks here at Film Seizure. But also, head on over to my website, www.bmovieanima.com, and you can get new text articles each and every Friday. And if you want to also watch a movie, I now have an episodic B-Movie Enema series that you can watch on YouTube. New episodes will be coming out every Saturday from January 2nd to March 27th, 2021. And that's season 1. There'll be a second season before the end of the year as well. So come watch a full movie with me on YouTube simply by searching for B-Movie Enema on YouTube. You can subscribe to the channel there as well. But you can also go over to bmovieenema.com and watch them on the site as well. So until next week, everybody, stay spooky.